To bring in Erin Elmore right now, a Trump surrogate. Erin, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thanks so much for joining us. So we heard Donald Trump's plan earlier this week. How do you think it differs from what we'll hear today from Hillary Clinton?
Well, the difference is what Hillary Clinton is going to do is create a humongous deficit to the tune of $2.2 trillion over the next decade. So Donald Trump is actually trying to help America and make changes and get away from the norm of Barack Obama, whereas Hillary Clinton is just going to put us further and further and further into debt.
Well, she's going to be raising revenue because she's raising taxes. Isn't that right, Shelby?
Yes, and if you look at a host of independent groups, Trump's tax plan and Trump's infrastructure spending is expected to add $10 trillion to the federal deficit, not $2 trillion.
Actually, I think because he lowered it to 3 brackets and took the highest rate up to 33%, which was a nuance but a change, it does take the cost down from that $10 trillion.
But he doubled Clinton's infrastructure plans. So if we're going to talk about the deficit, this is why I'm so confused. Republicans have slammed Democrats for adding to the deficit. Why don't they care about Donald Trump's math?
Well, I don't think it's actually about the math in that regard. It's just about what he's going to do for the country and job creation. All Hillary Clinton wants to do is falsely increase the minimum wage. That does nothing for our country. It doesn't create jobs. And the looser borders that she's going to create is actually going to reduce wages. So there's just no possible way that these numbers are adding up for the Democrats.
Right, so we worked on this thing for like the last 3 months. And no plan is perfect, so we're not going to pretend that it's perfect. But here's what the plan does. Number one, it simplifies the tax code. Number two, we're going to reduce and put a moratorium on regulation, which is super important to get the small businesses growing again. And then the last piece of this, which I think is super important for everybody, is that if you can get the revenue mix right, you will ultimately reduce the deficit. And the way you do that is exactly, frankly, is what Bill Clinton did. And so when you think about where the Democratic Party is today, they've moved so far to the left with such aggressive governmental controls that they're slowing down the growth of the economy. So if we can get the Trump plan in place and we can grow at the 4.5% to 5% that we could grow at as a nation, you're going to solve a lot of our problems.
What about that, Shelby? I mean, when you look at how far left this party has gone because of Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth
Bill Clinton
Warren
was running a budget surplus at the end of his term.
Yeah.
Sorry, Maria.
Right, and you bring up a really good point. Hillary Clinton's plan is completely different from anything Bill Clinton did when he was in the White House. Some of the things she's announcing today look a lot like Bernie Sanders' plans: debt-free college, raising the minimum wage, expanding Social Security.
But she's already talked about coming out, look, child care, for instance. She's already talked about, let's get child care costs across the country at 10%, cap it off. You know, that's going to be a job killer. That's going to be a business killer. I mean, she wants to take, instead of what Donald Trump is saying, which is give the taxpayer the credit, for instance, on child care for the next year, that's economic growth. She's saying, let's have the government take care of your child care. And that's worse, in my opinion.
Trump does want to put the money in the hands of business owners.
And the individual. That's economic growth. Yeah. And Hillary doesn't seem to be catching up to that message.
Now, one of the points in Hillary's plan, Cheryl, maybe you know this, she says she wants to help small business. I don't understand how she's helping small business in this plan. Does anybody on the panel, have you seen anything that actually moves the needle on small business? Nope.
Not unless you own a preschool and you're going to be running a universal preschool program.
She's talked about tax breaks for small businesses.
But she's raising taxes on the highest earners, and that raises taxes on small business.
Right, because on the highest earners, it depends on the business, though. What she's talking about is more from a regulation standpoint. And that's where Donald Trump has come out and said that's the opposite of what I want to do, and that's to Anthony's point.
And she has pledged to stand by and defend Obama regulations. And she hasn't mentioned changing the corporate tax rate. We haven't heard anything about that.
I'm not sure what the infrastructure... President Obama has already given us an infrastructure plan that did not work. I'm not really sure why Hillary's
let's talk about what actually does work, though, okay? So we studied this. This is a bipartisan thing. You go over 20% of the GDP at the national budget level, you have almost like an octopus that's controlling the private sector, and it constrains the growth in the private sector. And so we're at about 23.5%, 24% right now for the federal government. And guess what's happening, people? We're getting little to no growth. And so what the Trump plan is going to do is eventually get us back down to that 20% number, and you will see explosive growth as a result of that. And that will solve a lot of the problems that we're talking about on this program and other programs, but particularly the global deflationary problem. If you get the United States to grow again, plan in its capability and capacity, which the Trump plan puts you on, you're going to solve a lot of the world's problems.
I really was struck by the number of people who said there is not a growth aspect to the Hillary Clinton plan. I mean, it really was striking, because economic growth is the most important thing that we're talking about right now in terms of really creating
but
jobs.
her campaign is about progressivism and maintaining the status quo, and so it's not surprising, Maria, that you don't see anything related to growth.